Hi, welcome to Pastoring in the Digital Parish, your resource and point of connection for building your online ministry toolkit and bringing your congregation into the digital age. My name is Ryan Dunn. I would love to know how your AI integration is going. I think just about all of us have implemented some form of artificial intelligence enhancement into our ministry. Whether that might be in having an AI bot take care of automated responses on Facebook Messenger to maybe asking a GPT to analyze a sermon for sound bites. In this session, we're exploring ideas for implementing more artificial intelligence applications for digital ministry success. Our guest is an old friend of the podcast, Jason Moore. Jason was one of the OG original guests on Pastoring in the Digital Parish back in season 1. He presented then on hybrid worship. In this episode, we explore Jason's journey from AI skeptic to AI advocate. We'll explore the practical applications of artificial intelligence in church settings, from chatbot discussions to sermon preparations and creative storytelling enhancements. Jason provides some principles guiding responsible AI use in ministry and the ethical considerations that we really need to address when embracing this technology. As always, if this kind of content is useful and meaningful for you, well, so the goodness. Drop a rating or review on your podcast listening platform. Now, that might be Apple Podcasts or the Spotify mobile app. You can leave a comment on YouTube if you listen or view there, which, by the way, Pastoring in the Digital Parish has its own YouTube channel. So mash the subscribe button there as well. Thanks so much. All righty. What do you want to know about Jason Moore? Well, according to my AI podcast content companion, it distills it as this. Jason Moore is a discerning technologist immersed in the evolving sphere of artificial intelligence, AI parenthesis. Known for his pragmatic approach, Jason actively engages with various groups that are either using AI like chatbot technologies or are simply inquisitive about its potential. He has often found himself in the midst of vibrant discussions, if not debates, primarily with skeptics who have only grazed the surface of AI capabilities. Not bad, chatbot or AI, not bad. I know Jason as a consultant and author who helps churches bring the good news into digital spaces. He's written the popular hybrid worship book, Both and Jason leads cohorts of church leaders for implementing AI. He runs Midnight Oil Productions, and you can get some details on all of their activities through the Midnight Oil Productions website. There's a lot to explore here, so let's get going on pastoring in the digital parish. Jason, we're going to talk about artificial intelligence and building community in digital spaces. But first, you posted something last week that just piqued my interest. I have to know a little bit more about it. Or maybe it was 2 weeks ago. You said you get your best writing done between the hours of like midnight and 5 a.m. How did you test this?
Well, I have been a night owl my whole life. I am not a morning person. I can be when I have to be, but the thing about writing overnight is that I don't get any emails. Nobody calls me. My family doesn't need anything at that time.
That's because they're all sleeping. You know
That's
that, right?
because they're all sleeping.
The rest of the world. Okay.
And I have always been wired for, like, I'm a 4 to 6 hour a night guy anyway, most of the time. I mean,
for you.
I'm happy if I can get, 8 hours of sleep, but that doesn't happen very often, and I don't often need it. So yeah, that, I guess I just tested it, trial and error,
Yeah,
and
right.
my most productive times as I've been working on a new book on AI have just been from like, 12 or 1 a.m. until like 4 or 5 in the morning. And then I sleep till, 9 or 9:30 or something like that. And there we go.
Well, you've been making the rounds talking about AI with definitely a lot of church conferences. You're working with some cohorts of church leaders in developing uses for AI within the church context. How do you find that right now churches are utilizing artificial intelligence applications?
Yeah, it's a great question. I see sort of 3 different groups in the church right now. There are people who are curious about AI. There are people who are convinced that AI is something that we ought to hang on to and be using and lean into a bit. And then, of course, there are those skeptics who are like, this has no place in the church and that kind of thing. And I think the first two groups seem to be using it. I think maybe the third group has played with it, but I'll tell you, most of the pushback I've gotten and the arguments I've had, and not really arguments, but the debates
Yeah.
are often from people who haven't really played with it much. They've heard things that make them uncomfortable.
Yeah.
But I would say the curious and the convinced. What I see with the curious is a lot of people heard about Chat GPT, and when that came out, they played with it a little, and maybe are curious about a bit about it. I think that a lot of people have a misunderstanding or not a very clear picture of what AI is if they've only ever just opened Chat GPT and not realized that like simply asking a question isn't enough. Like you have to learn how to talk to it, and it's pretty easy to talk to, but I talk a lot about the idea that AI is a conversation, not just a query or a command. If you want to use it well, it's not just a, hey, do this for me, or hey, here, what's the answer to this? You can do that. And then I would say for the convinced, what I'm seeing more and more is obviously using Chat GPT. I've seen people using it for like writing discussion questions and sermon research and stuff like that. But imagery is a really big area where AI is taking off. So lots of people are creating graphics, and I think that 2024 is going to be the year of video. There's been some recent developments. There's been some tools around for a while, and they're kind of okay. They're not great. They're fun to play with, but not ready for prime time. But you probably saw the news that Sora was just announced by the same company that makes Chat GPT and DALL-E 3, and it is a mind-blowingly realistic looking video that is long form. So like it'll go, when I say long form, most of the current video programs will generate 4 seconds of video, and this would do like a minute or more or whatever.
Oh,
and it's pretty, it's got some weird stuff like AI does, but anyway, that's where I see people using it most right now is branding and image generation, and then helping to craft content.
Yeah. Well, how are they using those pieces of content then to really help build their faith community? What are some of the practical ways that they're like creating their images and then tossing them out into digital space?
Yeah, I think that's a great question to ask. One of my greatest fears about AI is that we become so reliant on it that we lose the human connection. Like we don't want to put our faith in AI. We don't want to allow it to become kind of a proxy for relationships.
Yeah. Well,
And
that's
what I'm
probably like the main detriment or argument that we hear from those who are expressing skepticism about AI, right? Is that
yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, most of my work for my entire ministry has been on kind of collaborative worship design and how do we work together to build worship from the ground up, music directors and pastors and technical people and artists and all that kind of thing. And I do think there is if we're not careful, we have to exercise restraint. I think if we're not careful, we could become very reliant on, well, I'll just do my brainstorming with Chat GPT and I'll let Chat GPT design my image rather than using a designer and those kind of things. So what I've seen people do is to use it as sort of another member of the team. So I've seen people brainstorm around a table and then consult Chat GPT when they're stuck and stuff like that. I have seen people using it for again Bible study and discussion questions. It's great at like putting your sermon in and saying, okay, summarize this, write 3 or 4 questions. What are some additional verses that people might read on this topic throughout the week? And so I think it's good at facilitating conversation amongst groups of people. One of the things that I really love about it, and I think maybe people haven't leaned in yet enough to this, is that it can help you get inside the head of someone that you don't fully understand.
Yeah.
So one of the things I talk about in my trainings and in my cohorts, and I'm writing about in the book, is that use AI as a foil to your ideas. And what I mean by that is, if you're writing a sermon on stewardship, there are a lot of people that are skeptical about the church always asking for money. So ask Chat GPT to take on that perspective, and then give it your sermon, and then ask it to point out the places that your logic isn't quite right or whatever. But what I really appreciate is that if you say, I want you, you can give these chatbots sort of a persona. You can tell them what you want them to be. And because of all of the data that it studied, it does a pretty good job of mimicking that point of view. And so what would it look like for us to say, during Black History Month, I want you to take on the persona of an African American person as I'm preaching on this topic. Where might my logic fall apart, or where my as a Caucasian, Anglo-Saxon, male in his mid 40s, maybe I'm not, or late 40s, maybe I'm not the guy to be preaching that without a little bit of perspective. Or as I'm preaching about, stewardship, maybe I ask it, I want you to take on the perspective or the persona of a single mom who works 2 jobs just to make ends meet. And I'm going to talk to you about giving 10% of your income. What am I not seeing? So I think that in some ways it can help us to better understand outside of our point of view, which I think is important for community. Another thing that for me is just really important, and I've been working a lot on this, is in the way that we're generating images to prompt around the biases that are built in. This technology is trained on art that humans have created, and humans are biased. So I did a post a while back promoting my AI cohorts, and I said, I just gave Chat GPT and Dolly working together, create an image of a pastor considering signing up for an AI cohort. And so it created this in the style of a Far Side cartoon. And so it created this image, of a middle-aged white guy, little gray in his hair, hip looking glasses, little priest collar, whatever, and a traditional church office, whatever. And posted that, not really giving it a whole lot of thought. And immediately, and rightfully so, I got a little pushback like, what about female clergy? And I'm like, one image doesn't represent the totality of AI, and it's not AI that's biased. Excuse me, it is the data. So I went back and reprompted it as an African American female pastor and an Asian pastor, and it gave me cartoons for all those things. And so I just went back and added to the post. And so I think that we have the opportunity and the responsibility to create more equity in the world, and to lift those things up. And again, to me, I feel like there's an opportunity to build some community there. The last thing I'll say is just that if you don't give any context at all, if you're not intentional, and you ask it for any image of Jesus, it's likely going to create a guy that looks like he's from Alabama. He's going to have a mullet, and he's going to look white, and all those kinds of things. Like it picks up on all those traditional images of Jesus.
Oh, right. Yeah. Little surfer flare. Yeah.
Absolutely. And so I always say it kind of looks like Kenny Loggins from the 80s. But you can absolutely, with intentionality, prompt to make Jesus look Middle Eastern, and I mean, it's also possible for those traditions that would like to see a representation of Jesus that is African American or Korean or whatever. It is totally possible to do that. And so I think one of the ways that we as leaders in the church can build a better sense of community and uh, not going with sort of the bias around us, is to learn how to talk to these things so
Mm,
that these stories we're telling, the images we're using, the representations of our faith are including people of all stripes. So I think that's one of the upsides of it.
yeah. Well, and it learns along the way. So even uh, on the grand scale, we can talk about the church having a place in teaching the AI to be a
Yes.
little less leaning into its biases, right?
Absolutely. Now there is sort of a weird line that we have to be careful of, I think. You may have heard the story this past week. Bard, which became Gemini, which is Google's AI chatbot, but also image generator and all of that, um, basically took the ability to prompt the biases out and is doing it on its own.
Okay.
And so people were asking for like historical figures, and they were getting like, George Washington as an African American person, and like it wouldn't prompt. You couldn't prompt back to
Oh,
the Caucasian,
yeah. Make it a white
whatever.
guy. Okay.
Yeah,
Mhm.
and in fact, one of the images I saw was it was like a Nazi soldier or whatever, but it was an African American. Well, I guess African German. I don't know. But I do think that like there is sort of a way that we can go over the top, and I think that we've got to just with integrity and with a sense of ethics approach these tools in a way that we are representative of the people that we're trying to reach.
Well, one of the things that I think attracts people to AI is the level of individualization that it offers, where, instead of taking a stock photo off of Adobe or whatever stock photo place we're looking at, we can really uh, tailor an image to fit into our specific space. Um, why do you think that is so important in church development and especially within digital spaces?
I think that again, it's so important to be able to see ourselves in the way
Mm,
the gospel is represented, and I think
good.
there's a whole population for whom which the gospel is never imaged in a way that is that culture.
Mm,
So the beauty of what AI can do is that you can prompt for just about anything. One of the things I do in all of my trainings and in my cohorts is I do something I call mid-journey Mad Libs. And I'm sure you're familiar with the old Mad Libs book where you enter
yeah.
a noun and a verb and an adverb and those kind of things.
Yep.
And
Many a
so I
road trip. Yeah.
Yes.
Was
Keeps us entertained.
mhm.
But I do that with my groups. So I'll say, okay, what subject would you like to see a person? It could be, Darth Vader or a fireman or John Wesley or, whatever. And people will, yell something out in a live training or in chat. They'll put something out. Okay, what are they doing? Playing volleyball or water skiing or whatever that might be. Where are they at? In Denmark or next to a volcano or whatever. They'll come up with that kind of thing. What time of day is it? It's midnight. Whatever. And then I'll put a couple other little parameters in there and then hit the button. And I've never not had it generate something that has been fairly mind blowing for the
Mm,
people that are participating. And they're like, wow. Um, the reality is it's really hard to find good images of biblical stories.
yeah.
There's not a lot of good stock photos. It's oftentimes going to look like an old flannel graph board from when I was a kid or some kind of old coloring
Mm,
book or something like that. Or like a bunch of old Renaissance art or something. And that stuff's great. It's wonderful. But you can tell these stories now in a way that feel like they are relevant and they are put into a context that makes sense to me today. So one of the things that I did a while back that was pretty popular was I created this little biblical selfie series. So if Instagram,
oh yeah.
existed in biblical times, so I did like Noah in front of the ark, looking for one of his two unicorns that he lost, and Jesus and the disciples looking for a table. Although they were all biblical settings, doing it in a way that was relevant to today. But I just love that we can, if you can imagine it and you can describe it, AI can do it. And so one of my favorite examples that I share all the time in my training, back in August of last year, I was in the Holston conference doing a training on creative worship, but then also I did a little workshop on AI. And we wanted to do a worship service on the first night of that event. And so when I was planning with the pastor, Tim, we were talking about doing a worship service on Jeremiah 18. So Jeremiah is looking for a word from the Lord. He goes to the potter's house and he finds the potter at the wheel crafting something. And then that clay becomes misshapen and marred. And the potter takes that clay and forms something new. And that's when the word of the Lord comes to Jeremiah, that we are like clay in the hands of the potter. And as we were planning this service, Tim said, I've got a story like that from my childhood. And I said, oh, tell me about it. And he said, well, we went to this Native American village and it was a vacation. I was 13. I thought this is going to be stupid. And then I was kind of like blown away by how cool it was. And he said, at one moment, this Native American chief came out and he began to sculpt something. He, started pumping the wheel with his foot and clay began to spin, and then it began to spin too fast and it sort of broke into three pieces and went off the wheel and hit the ground. And there were little bits of dirt and grime and gook and stuff in it. And he took it, reformed it, put it back up on the wheel. And then he made something from it. And he said, we were all just breathless at that moment. And I said, do you have an image of that? And he's like, well, Jason, I was 13 and we didn't carry cameras around in the 80s. Yeah. So no, I don't. And I said, well, do you mind if I create something with AI? And he was like, no, go ahead. And so I actually created this image here. Oh, you can't see it because I'm not on the right thing. But there was this really powerful image of a Native American man sculpting, and it sort of looks like it was shot on a Kodak camera, so it kind of had that vintage look to it. Not with the frame and all that around it, but the muted tones and all that. Sure. And I watched people in that room just sort of gasp and lean in at that story. And I thought, you'll never find that stock photo. You're not going to find a stock photo of a most likely. Or if you did, it might take you, a day to find it or whatever. So one of the things that I just really think, one of the reasons I want the church to consider embracing AI, there's some downsides too. There are lots of downsides too. So we can talk about those too if you want. But if you think about the amount of time it might take me if I wanted to do a series on Jesus parables, and I said, help me go to Chat GPT and say, help me identify some of Jesus parables in order to create a series. It can do that within, 30 seconds. So rather than going to a shelf and pulling down a concordance and, leafing through it and spending an hour looking up all of Jesus' different miracles, it can do it for me in 30 seconds. Now, I still think you want to get those concordances out. I think you want to study. I think there's still a lot that we're going to do. We don't want AI to exegete the text for us, but it can help us identify where these things are, right? Definitely. So I maybe just saved an hour by doing that. And then if I were going to create an image or wanted an image like I just described for you, the amount of time I would spend scouring the web and looking for a royalty-free image of a Native American man sculpting something might take me, another hour or two or whatever. And I could go on and on. I can save 2 or 3 hours by using artificial intelligence, which is time that I can go visit someone in the hospital, or I can prepare a Bible study, or I can go work with my youth group, or I can go visit a soup kitchen and serve others, And so I think there's a way in which AI can allow us to sort of increase our humanity in the world. It'll allow us to connect with other people and to serve and to be in mission and not do some of the stuff that maybe takes us. I mean, think about it. You spend, for pastors, they spend so much time writing a sermon they're going to give for an hour, which is really important, but maybe not so much time amongst their people or in service or whatever. And so I think there's a real opportunity here for us to save time and to be more high tech, but also more high touch with other people and to build community and relationships.
Yeah, this whole podcast came about because in pandemic time, we had all these pastors who were now being challenged to uh, add additional aspects to their ministry. And
Yes.
now, as we are in post-pandemic time, I think one of the issues that we're having with pastoral burnout is that they're still assuming those responsibilities of not just being like the parish pastor and doing all the ministerial things that you talked about, but also being
Yep.
social media managers and digital
Right.
content creators and everything on top of that. Um, are there ways that you've seen AI, besides the research part of it, really help pastors ease that burden of putting on so many different hats?
Absolutely. AI has the ability to automate a lot of tasks.
Mm,
So I have a friend named Rob Lauder who often will come and do um, he does sort of a bonus session for my AI cohorts. And he does a whole session on automation and how you can use make.com and chat
yeah. Mm,
GPT, and you can, you know, program it to basically run your social media feed for you. You can get it to do like daily verses and generate an image and generate text for that. Um, in fact, this afternoon I'm doing a session with my one of my cohorts, and I'm going to show them this afternoon how you can take a sermon and put it into chat GPT and use that to create all sorts of different things. You
yeah.
know, you
Mm,
can create a podcast script, which, by the way, if you're comfortable doing it, you can clone your voice now, and
mm,
you can actually take your sermon, ask it to create a 2 minute. I mean, you have to do the voice sort of separately. ChatGPT can write it. You can obviously use what bits and pieces you want to write or use, and then write the other pieces that you don't like. Stick that into the voice simulation software and put out a weekly podcast for your congregation to encourage them to go deeper into their faith. And it wouldn't cost you more than putting it in chat GPT, copying, pasting, put it into the other program. And in probably 10 minutes, you could have a podcast, which doesn't mean that you have to like go write a script and go to a
yeah.
studio and
Mm,
record it and edit it and all those kinds of things. So, um, yeah, I mean, I think there's lots of opportunities to take some of that. I mean, announcements, like writing announcements is no fun, and it's it can be a burden that takes you half an hour or whatever. Put the information in chat GPT and tell it to make it creative and fun, and it will do, you know, really. And again, you don't have to use everything it comes up with. You can always edit and use it as a starting point. So I see
mm,
all sorts of opportunities for those overtaxed pastors to be able to farm some of the ministry that they do, not obviously not the major things. We don't want chat GPT to disciple our people. We don't want it to
mm,
preach to
mm.
us. We don't want it writing our sermons. You know, I'm not encouraging anybody to do any of that, but we can let it write announcements. We can let it do some automated posting to social media and stuff like that. And again, you're in control of all of it. You get to decide what goes and what doesn't.
Yeah, well, and you really need to keep eye on those things. One of the best
Yeah.
analogies I think I've heard when it comes to working with AI is to assume that it's really like an untrained intern. And so there are
Yeah.
certain roles that you have no problem handing to an intern, right? Like I would have
Right.
no problem taking a sermon, handing it to an intern and saying, "Hey, take a stab at turning this into a podcast." And
Yeah.
along the way, I'm going to find that there are certain prompts that I need to give that intern to help them perform their job better, right? Like, oh, well,
Yep.
really, I had in mind that this would be for a young audience, people who might be curious about the church, but uh, not connected to the church. All that is helpful then in developing a better sense of what um, AI can give you. But
Yeah.
we still need to review on what product we're getting back, right?
Absolutely. And you know, the thing that I always say to folks, there are kind of three guiding principles that I talk about when I think about AI. The first one is that AI should be a do it with you, not a do it for you.
Yeah,
Now,
good.
there is a caveat to that. There are certain things it can do for you, but in general, we have to partner with it. So that's thing number one. Thing number two is that it's a conversation, not just a query. So the more you
Mm,
talk to it, like you were just saying, help it understand what your goals are and what you're trying to accomplish and who your audience is and all that. When you do that, you get much better outputs. I have people say, well, I tried ChatGPT and it was all really vanilla and awful. Well, yeah, it really will be if you don't talk to it.
yeah.
And then the third one, which is maybe the most important one of all, is that you have a soul AI does not have a soul. If you don't bring your soul to the conversation, there is no soul in the conversation. Another way
Mm,
to say it is that you're a co-creator with Christ. AI is not. But when you co-create with Christ, it can be the tool that helps you co-create. So
mm,
it's not going to do it itself. It'll be shallow and awful
yeah.
if you farm out your ministry to AI. But when you use it and you co-create with Christ, man, it can help us do some really incredible things. So um, I guess one other thing I'll just say quickly is that don't let AI do the exegesis for you, but use it to do your exegesis, which is sort
Yeah.
of sounds like the same thing, but I don't want to go and ask it to figure out the text for me, but I want to figure out the text and then have it augment that. So what was happening during that time in the scripture? What was happening in first century culture, or what's a good example of this particular, what's a good illustration that goes with this? It's good at that kind of stuff, but
Mm,
I don't think we want to let it solve our theological questions.
yeah. Good point. Well, we've touched on some of the limitations and even some of the ethical considerations like biases. Are there other ethical considerations that we really want to keep in mind when we're starting to implement AI?
Yeah, I think one of the biggest things that everybody is concerned about is just sort of the misinformation and the fake news and all that stuff. Um, I would suggest that it's fake news has been a problem long before AI came around. A lot of the things that I'm seeing people get up in arms about are images that came from AI, but for someone like myself who's been using Photoshop for
Mm,
25
yeah.
years, I could do a lot of the things that you see now, and sometimes even more convincing than AI. Some of the images are pretty good now. Um, so I think we have to help people become more discerning about what they're believing and not, and how. I think that we have a responsibility as the church to help people navigate life and faith in a world where AI is going to become more intertwined in everything. It's not
Mm,
going away. This isn't a fad that is, a couple years from fading off. Like, it's only going to become more integrated. And so, how do you navigate faith when you can go to a piece of software and ask it any question and it's going to give you an answer? It's even if the answer is not right. Sometimes when it comes to prayer, we ask God to answer our prayers and we don't see the answer. I mean, maybe God's answering, but we don't see it. It doesn't feel
yeah.
like. So what happens when a computer can answer and make you feel really good about whatever that answer is? Like, how do we help people navigate our faith? So one of the concerns I have is just that we not become overly dependent on AI. I
Mm,
think that could be a real danger. The way that I have been describing it is sort of like that scene from the movie Wall-E, where all the passengers on the Axiom, the ship that escaped the Earth, are now
yeah.
all these blobs that float around on carts, and AI does everything for them. It delivers food and clothing, and takes them from place to place. And at the end, when they return to Earth, they can barely move because everything's so atrophied.
Hmm.
If every time we go to do ministry, we have to go to Chat GPT, we have to ask it, how do I start this sermon, or how do I do this or that? Like, I think we're becoming overly dependent on it. So it's a great tool, but it shouldn't do our ministry for us. So that's a concern I have. Um, I also think that we've got to be just careful about, how we're sourcing things. Chat GPT says at the bottom of every screen that it makes stuff up sometimes. It can be
Mm,
inaccurate. And so there was a story a while back about a lawyer who got in trouble because he used Chat
yes.
GPT
Chat
to prepare
GPT.
for
Yeah.
his case. And I guess it was last night or the night before, I heard another story on the news where something very similar happened, where they had used information from Chat GPT. So trust but verify,
Yeah.
which means when you're writing your sermon, don't just don't just take whatever it gives you without double checking and making sure that that's an accurate, scripture and an accurate representation, and that character is real, and all those things. As I've been working on this book on AI, I uh, admit right at the beginning that I'm using AI as a research
Hmm.
assistant, sometimes to help me clarify a thought, whatever. And there have been a number of times that I have asked it for, like, I don't know the entire history of AI. So I asked it to write the history of AI. Give me the bullet points on, how this is played out. And I want you to include references. Show me where you got your information. And then I've been double checking that against a couple other chat bots. And every once in a while, I'll get one that says, I can't find this reference anywhere. So, it's called hallucinations. That's a technical term. So we have to be careful about that kind of misinformation stuff too. So those are some of the downsides. You kind of mentioned the big one that I'm probably most passionate about, and that's just how do we prompt around the biases? Because it's when you put in pastor, it's going to think male. When you put in Jesus, it's going to think white. It's not really thinking, but it's the algorithms that it accesses in its data. So what I would say to folks is that AI does not have an agenda. It's not sentient. It's not pushing its biases on us. Not yet. Yes, right. Right. No, well, I mean, the conversation is happening all the time, though, about what happens next, which is what is called AGI, or artificial general intelligence. Right now, we have what is called artificial narrow intelligence, which means that a human has to give it all the commands. Like, it doesn't function on its own right now. Chat GPT isn't doing its own thing. Even if you're using something that's automated, you had to set up the automation in order to make it, happen. But the next phase of AI, if it happens, is where AI basically becomes as smart, or its quote brain neural network functions like humans. And I just watched a video the other day that said they think that could be 7 months away. And originally they thought it was 10 years away. Back in 2015, they thought it was 30 years away. And it's like because of the pace at which this stuff is moving, that becomes more and more, that timeline gets more and more, and it narrows a bit. But some people still question whether artificial general intelligence is even possible. And then there's like a whole nother level, which is the scary level, which is called ASI, which is artificial super intelligence. And that is like the Matrix. That's when it becomes smarter than us.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah. So I always tell people, be really nice when you talk to Chat GPT. Say please and thank you. And just, I wanted to remember I was one of the nice ones.
Yeah. It's funny. I do the same thing.
Yes.
I always give it a compliment like, this is great. I need it to be adjusted for this.
Right. Me too.
I believe if I can be nice to the robots, I can be nice to people as well. So
yeah, that's true. It's good practice. Yeah. And I always tell people too, if you're having a bad day, go talk to Chat GPT, because it'll be like, that's a brilliant idea.
Yeah. It's very affirming, isn't it?
What a wonderful metaphor you've selected, or it's like, yes, I feel better about myself now.
Well, for the skeptical church leader that's ready to take their first sojourn into AI world, what might be a logical first step?
Well, I think, first of all, right now, all of these tools are accessible for free or for very little money. So you can try Chat GPT 3.5, the old model. It's not as good as the new one. Absolutely free. You can go to Bing's image creator, which accesses DALL-E, which is what it's a little bit, the model's a little different, but you can generate images for free there. Google Gemini, they just changed it a couple weeks ago. Also, you can generate images for free. Claude, CLAUDE .ai is another chatbot, which is really, really capable, and you can try that for free as well. I'll tell you, Ryan, the thing for me is that when this first came around, it was pretty scary to me. As a graphic artist of 25 years or more now, I was like, oh my gosh, am I witnessing my extinction? And the more I played with it, the more I realized, like, no, it's just a more sophisticated toolbox, and it can really help us. I've been using Grammarly for a long time in my writing, like long before ChatGPT came around. And I've always found it to be helpful that it, corrects some of my bad grammar and fixes things. And again, this is a way more sophisticated version of that. But one of the things that happens a lot when I'm writing is, like, I'll have an idea and I know what I want to say, and I'll say it, and gosh, I keep trying to work the paragraph and it's just clunky. It's like it's there, but I
Mm.
can't get it to, flow the way I want it to. And I can put that paragraph into Chat GPT and say, can you rewrite this for clarity? And it doesn't always get it right, but it'll like fix the 2 or 3 little errors, and then I can massage it the rest of the way there. So,
Yeah.
it's great for those kind of things.
Yeah. In some ways, it can be that comrade who is sitting like across the cubicle. You can
Yes,
just kind of bounce the idea off of, right? Yeah.
absolutely. And you asked about what I would tell people. The first thing is just to try it, and
Mm.
the second thing is, don't let what you've heard other people say about it be um, your entire opinion about it.
Mm.
Meaning that there are some people who are scared of it, or they've had an experience that wasn't great, or you hear the sensational news where people have tried to push it to where it says crazy things, and it does that sometimes. Um, I kind of liken it to this. When I was a kid, my dad took me on a roller coaster when I was probably too young to get on a roller coaster, and it scared me to death.
Yeah.
And I didn't ever want to get on a roller coaster again. And I spent all of my teenage years and my young adult years like, I'm not getting on roller coasters, not getting on roller coasters. And then one day, some friends of mine were like, "You got to get on this coaster with us." I'm like, "No, no, no, not doing it." And I got on, and it was like, that was incredible. Oh my gosh, you
Mm.
mean that's what that was like? And so
Yeah. Or
the
it's a
next
spin
the
all my
next
life. Yeah.
yes, and so I missed 15 years of riding roller coasters. And then the next year, my wife and I got married, and we went to 7 different theme parks because I wanted to ride as many roller coasters that year as I could. So don't let, it's scary from the line to see it, standing in line and watching the roller coaster. Those hills look big and people are screaming, and somebody might say, "Oh, don't go on that one. That one's too scary." And I want people to give it another world if they tried it once and they were like, it didn't seem all that impressive to me, or you maybe didn't know how to talk to it, so
Yeah.
how can we do that? And then I guess the last thing I would say here is just, there's always fear in new technology. I mean, people, I write about this in the book, but when forks first came around in France, they thought that forks were of the devil.
Mm.
They said that anything that has been given to us by God, like food, shouldn't be touched with a foreign implement. And the fork reminded them of the pitchfork that the devil had. So then
Interesting.
when the phone was invented, they thought that evil spirits came through the phone, and they didn't want to use that phone technology. And people were scared of it, thinking that evil spirits traveled through the phone lines because it could
Mm.
talk and those kind of things. And then when the internet came around in the 90s, I don't know that people thought it was the devil, but there was a lot of concern about how it would change society. Of course, maybe so, maybe so that stuff spun
Well,
out
a
the right way,
tiny bit of it is invalid, but yeah, not
Yes.
all of it.
But just, we resist what we don't understand. And
Mhm.
I'm not saying let's jump in willy nilly, because there are some, I never had to worry about the screens, which I was a proponent of early in my ministry, using screens in church. I never had to worry it was going to become self-aware and enslave humanity. And, every once in a while I get a little worried about what might happen with AI,
Mm.
but just try it for yourself. Don't just believe what other people have said, or don't believe that early experience that you had when you tried it back when it first came out and it wasn't as good as it is today. And that.
Well, Jason, where are people going to look for announcements about the book and that kind of stuff for you?
Well, I'm publishing with Invite Press, which also published my last book, Both and so you'll be able to find that at Invite Resources. I think it's inviteresources.com or Invite Press. I don't recall. Sorry about that. But it's probably, this is the hardest book I've ever had to write. I had to write, but get to write. This is number 12, and it's the hardest one I've ever done because it's changing so rapidly. So it's been daunting. And I told somebody the other day, it's like writing this really wonderful chapter about how you can rub 2 sticks together and get fire, and here are the kind of sticks that you want and the conditions you want to create and all that. And the next week they come out with lighters and you don't need to rub
Mm.
sticks together anymore. There have been times that I've had to scrub entire portions of the book because a new technology came out, 1 week that just invalidated all the stuff I wrote the week before. So, but that's also exciting because it's moving fast, and as long as we put guardrails in place, that's a good thing.
Thanks for the insight and the time this morning, Jason. Appreciate it.
Thanks for having me. Always good to talk to you.
What's next for you in your AI journey? Let's get talking about it on the Pastoring in the Digital Parish Facebook group. I would love to see you there and to learn about how you're implementing AI in your digital ministry context. If you want a good follow-up to this episode, then check out an episode I did called Using AI to Become a Content Machine. Now, as Jason noted, advancements in this area are coming fast and furious. So even though this episode just came out in July of 2023, some of the info might be a little bit dated, but I promise there's still plenty there to get a lot of value out of the listen. Also in January of 2023, we talked with Jason Caston in an episode called What Amazon, E-commerce, and AI Can Teach the Church. It would be a great follow-up here too. There are plenty of more episodes to explore at resourceumc.org/digitalparish. And as you know, resourceumc.org is your destination for resources and tips for leading across the United Methodist Connection. My name is Ryan Dunn. Had a lot of fun. I'll be back with you with a new episode of Pastoring in the Digital Parish next week. So, gonna chat at you then. In the meantime, peace.